Alyn, and this is a special edition of Late Night Health, identifying the room in the elephant in the room, critical communication strategies in the face of sexism. We've all just been watching a fabulous hour-long conversation. We're going to spend about 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, talking to our uh, guests who've been watching this very powerful conversation. Um, this is a special edition of Late Night Health, and we're going to do something a little bit differently. We're going to call this After the Elephant. And what we're doing is we're going to take a look, as we just heard from leaders in the natural product industry that work in both trade media and trade associations, on what they're seeing and hearing in the industry on the topic of sexism. And the goal of After the Elephant is process this information and respond to it in a discussion format with some leaders in the industry, and then challenge other leaders in the industry to do some deep work to make meaningful and fundamental changes. Now, let me introduce our panel members. First, we have Hank Schultz. He's a senior editor of Natural Products Insider. Hello, Hank.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thank you. We have Katrina Tolentino, executive director of Naturally Network. Hello, Katrina.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here.
And we have, last but not least, we have Craig M. Buckle. He is the Senior Communications Director for the Council for Responsible Nutrition. And we're going to get him in there all like that, and that's good. Okay. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Let's start with, you've all watched the last hour of the program that Amy Summers from Pitch Publicity has put together. What's your thought? Let's start with you, Craig. What was your thought on this first panel regarding trade industry and trade media and trade industry associations? And Craig went away. He'll be back. Hank, I'll ask you that question.
You mean my kind of 30,000-foot reaction to the panel?
Yes, sir.
Well, it was very interesting to me to hear these perspectives, and it has been sort of a learning journey for me. We can talk about this a little bit later in the podcast. My perspective, having been in the daily newspaper for many years, but it's been a real learning journey for me to hear these perspectives from the standpoint of I've come from a fairly privileged background. I didn't have to worry much about getting ahead in life. We had plenty of money, got to go to good schools, etc. And when you come from that perspective, it's easy to just incorporate those sorts of viewpoints as the natural starting point, and not really be able to see things from other people's perspectives quite so easily. So, I'm continually being confronted with these ideas as I'm in the industry. This New Hope, when I first started working there, I worked there before I was at Nutrient Ingredients USA for a number of years. I was with New Hope before, and now again I'm with Informa, which New Hope is part of. But it's been it's a very female-centric industry, or much more so than where I came from. So that's, so I've been very interested to hear these perspectives, but also I'm interested to hear how far people think that the industry still needs to go, because it seems like it's gone a long way towards this kind of equality, judging from my past experience in my life. So I'll just leave it at that, and we can talk more about it later.
Hank, thank you very much. Craig, let's take a look at you, and you might want to adjust your camera for us a little bit so we can see your face. What did you think of the panel during the last hour? What was your overall impression?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And let me just say, for me, the conversation was really very raw. and I don't want to derail the conversation early on, our conversation early on, but I'll simply say it was very raw for me because having just come back from XOS, I had a situation that would fall into one of the isms, and I'm really, hearing the discussion, I got a little angry just hearing how some of the our friends in the industry have been, somewhat dismissive about even on the sexism front. When I think it was Sandy or whomever was talked about the panel that they had, and basically the room emptied out. I mean, I was pretty much infuriated just hearing that because um, if people, it's one thing for people to say that they're interested in making a change, but when you see their actions like that, that just tells me there's limited interest in really pursuing solutions around sexism, racism, anything else like that. And it's very disappointing. And as a person of color who's lived for many years, trying to get ahead and do all the right things, it's just very frustrating when people who seem to feel like they have privilege don't, and it doesn't affect them, just punch out on it. So I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks again for having me.
And let's go to Katrina, who is the you're the strongest here because you're the only woman on this panel of guys talking about sexism, and I think that that takes a lot of guts, just right there. Thank you. And last but not least, I wanted to say to Sandy, Sandy Al Menderes. Thank you for commenting and saying that you're excited for this conversation. Um, Katrina, what was your takeaway from the conversation?
Yeah, I know that, this is a tough position for all of us to be kind of in this raw space, and I'm hoping that we can all be vulnerable. I mean, a few high level things. I definitely can relate a lot to a room emptying out when we're starting to talk about sexism and we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I think this is something that I've seen many, many times in many, not just expo, but really in lots of conversations. What ends up happening is the allies that exist are the ones that are in the room. And so I would just like to say that if you are one of the people that stood up to leave, that means that it's not impacting you. And that means we need you even more. So that's something, I definitely had a reaction to that. And that's something, to build on what Craig just shared. And then a couple of things, I think there were some things touched on around like generational differences. I think there's a space in between generations and the new generation of leaders and founders that are coming into the industry. That space, the fact that we're noticing sexism more in the industry, that space is the opportunity for all of us, right? And so when we're having these conversations, what we're actually trying to do is bridging the gap, whether it's a generational gap, whether it's a gender gap. So that's, I think that's important to say because these conversations are uncomfortable and people can get up and walk away if it's not something that impacts them greatly. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is that sexism as a word can seem like the behaviors that we're talking about and that we're looking for are very overt, but we touched a little bit on the smaller behaviors around being dismissed, about being ignored, being unheard. Those are just as damaging in this conversation. So lots more to cover, but those are just kind of the high level things that I definitely had some strong reactions to.
Let me throw this out to Craig, and maybe uh, uh, Hank and Katrina can jump in as well. And that is sexism an issue for women or men, or is it an issue for both? During it was brought this was brought up during the hour, and it struck me as being yes, this is both an issue for men and women. It's for everyone. Craig?
Yeah, yes, Mark. It absolutely is an issue for everyone. And I've worked in many corporations over the course of my career, and I can tell you I have seen it firsthand in in the in the workplace I've been where women are not treating other women with the same respect that they would want, same dignity, and really um, you know putting them in positions that they shouldn't have to be forced to be put in, just as well as men have done that. And it's like any of these other issues. It's not going to just take one segment of our society or one segment of the cultural group to participate. It's going to require everyone's investment, everyone being willing to be educated, everyone's willing to be empathetic, and really everything affect you as an individual, as a person, whatever, that it is important if we're going to advance ourselves as a broader human society. And the United States is based on freedom, but some people feel that they have more freedom than others. So
Yeah.
we all need to be in the same space to be willing to work toward a common goal.
Hank, your thoughts? Oops, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I actually agree. I absolutely agree with what Craig had to say, and I would say that in a way, I think these questions of the ways in which sexism and racism might be bound together. I think, in a way, sexism has proven to be even more intractable and insidious. Not to say that racism, these problems are solved in our society by any stretch, but
Right.
if I go back to when I first started in the newspaper business, when I first started working at a major metropolitan daily here in Denver in 1986, there were still quite a few older people working there who had started in the business in maybe the early 60s. And some of those attitudes were carrying over. So, there were words that, hurtful, ugly words that could be used to refer to a Black American that you would never hear at that time, but you would still hear a lot of very crude words to refer to women. And that still seemed to be thought of as like, okay, and just one of the things that the boys did, right? And so that changed slowly, but I absolutely think that it was something that if you want full equality, there has to be equality across all categories, or everyone's diminished.
And Katrina.
We're talking really about the social infrastructure that we're in. So it's going to impact both men and women. We all participate in it, whether we're aware of it or not. And that's why these conversations and making a difference in this area is tough, because um, sexism is in our schools at a young age. It's in our family units. It's really in our daily life, and we're so used to it that we're looking for overt and much more damaging behaviors to call out, when really it can be as small as you ignoring an email from a woman because you didn't like the opinion that she had, right? And so it's really pervasive, and it impacts both sexes and in every aspect of our life.
One of the things that I noticed during the conversation was that women take it. Okay, that's in quotes. They they may have, somebody says, "Hey, honey, um, uh, ma'am." That's one that I have to work on. I grew up calling women ma'am, and I have to break myself of that habit. Do you think that if there's blatant sexism, a lot of women don't don't report it? They don't tell their supervisors, HR, somebody at a conference. What do you think? And I'm going to start with you, Katrina.
It often goes unreported because it's a burden to be the victim to do the reporting. You may not feel safe enough to report it. You're afraid of the repercussions, right? And again, I think that there's not enough allies to even have the safe conversation. And so um, I think that it's a lot more prevalent than we can even imagine. And I mean, I can think of many, many, many times just since the beginning of this year that things have happened to me personally that I've gone on that I have not reported, just because I would be reporting something every day, Mark. It's
Wow.
exhausting.
How bad, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you put these? Or is it across the board, all 10?
No, I think there's varying degrees, and I know the panel also mentioned this, that it it's, some of it's not malicious, right? Some of it is generational, some of it is just sort of the status quo of doing business. And one thing that I'd like to call out that I'm observing a lot of right now is um, men can sometimes expect obedience sounds a lot like respect to men. And
Wow.
when women have an opinion and it's different from a man's opinion, when and it could be that we're offering it up because we're experts in that.
Got it.
That doesn't matter. It can be seen as disrespect, and so I think that is a root cause for some of the behavioral issues that we see. And it's a tough thing for me to even say out loud that obedience is required of me, and that's needed of me to play the game to advance professionally. And as someone that's a leader in the industry, in this very visible role, people assume I have this power position, and I do. But there are times that I am also silenced, and that I feel unheard. So if it's happening to me, it's happening to a lot of people.
Suzanne Shelton just joined us, and we're going to, let's see if we can bring up her comment here. Well, Suzanne Shelton said Katrina's making so many important points, and it's clear men have no idea what we deal with. And that's true. And I think that, at least I'm going to speak for the three of us, we're here to learn. We don't want to make the same mistakes. I mean, that's why I agreed to do this with Amy, because I am convinced that I'm doing things that I don't realize I'm doing. And I want to learn. I don't want to offend anybody. I want to work with everybody, you know. And I wanted to say hello to Christopher Cicero for saying hello. And we appreciate that as well. Um,
If I could just jump in here, Mark, I
yeah,
do
sure.
think that's a real key point. For my own personal journey, when I started in the natural products business, I was first working at New Hope. That's almost 13 years ago now. And that was really my first experience of working in a room that was primarily women younger than myself. And that was a learning experience for me. And I realized, much as you may have done, and maybe Craig, you've had the same experience, that there's certain attitudes that one adopts that you don't even realize that you're thinking about things in a certain way, and those come out. So one of the things that I've really appreciated is having kind of one-on-one learning sessions with people. Every so often, somebody's told me, that was hurtful to me, or that I don't know if you meant to express yourself in that way. One of the things that I've always tried to do as a journalist when I'm talking to sources is, I ask a lot of questions, even if something might seem obvious. I want to make sure that I absolutely understand where people are coming from, and to make sure that I've understood properly what somebody's trying to convey to me. And I appreciate when people say the same to me. So you know, sometimes I've done I don't need to go into any specifics, and none of them were egregious. I mean, nobody wrote me up or anything like that. But on the other hand, every once in a while, when you feel like you've unintentionally um, hurt somebody, that hurts, and it's an opportunity for learning that I do absolutely take to heart.
Craig, let me
Yeah,
ask you this. One of the comments during the last hour was about the classes. And they talked about it several times, how maybe they have a class or a session, a seminar, and people leave the room. That the leaders in industry don't show up, they don't participate. Can you respond to that? I mean, well, let me simplify this. Our classes on sexism, racism, ageism, peopleism, are they worthwhile?
Yeah, I mean, look, I learned earlier in my career that every day we walk into the office, it should be about continuous learning. You know, I do a variety of things. I'm sure Katrina does. I'm sure Hank does. I'm sure you do, where it's incumbent upon us to learn every day. I mean, the simple thing I think we all have in common here is that we're communicators. So I know we write every day. And so our goal is to write as effectively as possible, as concisely as possible. And just the ability to continue to improve that writing is a continual process of learning. And we can carry that through to all of our other practices, especially as it relates to engaging with people. And you know, as someone who has stood side by side with corporate executives, and I still continue to do that, we're always encouraging them. If any project is going to be effective, it starts from the top down. If everyone sees the leader buying in, engaging fully, and being, you know, committed to it, and I think
Mm-hmm.
committed is the key word here because it's one thing to say you're doing it. It's another thing to be committed to it, and really having it be heartfelt, so and sincere, because people can tell when you're faking it. And so if the leader's committed to it, they're going to be there because the leader should always be aware of the fact that their subordinates are watching them, and their actions speak volumes. And if their leader is walking out of the room in the beginning of a discussion because he or she doesn't want to hear it, there's essentially saying, I'm validating your departure as well. And so the leaders need to be present, they need to be accountable to themselves and to their subordinates, and they need to be committed to taking the appropriate action to ensure that this doesn't continue to manifest itself.
The word you used it just now, and it was brought up several times during the conversation, and that's the word communication. We're all in the communication business. I talk to people every week about some form of health. Uh, Hank, you're writing about it. Craig, you're writing and talking about, health, and as is Katrina. So, how do we get that communication to be a two-way street so that corporate people way up in the sea level understand what's going on in the real world? Katrina?
Yeah, right before the panel started, I came across this article in the Wall Street Journal talking about Silicon Valley Bank and their president and the quote that he sent out as part of their proxy statement. And I'm going to read it to you because this really pissed me off. And
Sure.
this is very damaging and it's very related to this conversation. They said, or he said, 91% of the Silicon Valley Bank board being independent and 45% women. They also have one Black, one LGBTQ plus, and two veterans. And the article said, I'm not saying 12 white men would have avoided this mess, but the company may have been distracted by diversity demands.
Oh boy.
Now, that says so much. That's out in the world. And when those types of sentiments are front and center in the news, we are in the environment that we're in right now, there's so much fear there, and people are um, those ideas are very easy to snowball. And so there's so much responsibility around being intentional about um, how we elevate women, celebrating their success, right? You see so much more examples of women making mistakes or whatever the case may be, because women are not allowed to make mistakes. You make one, you're done. And so that statement that this man made is very damaging to the work that we're all trying to do. It prevents people from learning. It prevents people from making investments in this area, and that is, that's just one example, right? And so, I think from a news perspective, I think there's a lot of intentionality that we're seeing across our partners, and all the folks that were on the panel. But we're that needs to be a much wider practice.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that was a great news story that you read. What's interesting to me is that criminal prosecution may happen to the top executives of that
Uh,
Silicon Valley bank. Debbie
so
Golden, thank you
come
for
on.
egads. Craig, did you have something to
Yeah.
say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to, well, I did. I want to follow up on, that great or appalling item that Katrina just read. I mean, you probably saw my reaction to that, but, if I got to tell you, if that was my leader, I would call him out on it because ultimately, you have to have a courage to move forward with that. And I think that's really where this, we fall short. People are fearful of being retaliated against for calling out, frankly, what I would characterize an atrocity, because that is not acceptable. For him to suggest that organization was failing because they were focused on diversity concerns, I mean, that's about as dismissive as it gets. I mean, he chose not to even enter the room and make an attempt. And so that's the sort of
He's the
attitude
CEO.
that
He
we're
was
still
like, no
overcoming.
thanks, like,
Absolutely.
no
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Well, he's not
Yeah.
taking
I mean,
responsibility, and that elephant in his room has
no,
squashed the room. So, I,
not at
I
all.
if let me, we only have a few more minutes left, maybe, yeah, and we're going great, so we'll go as long as we can here. But my question is,
Yeah. Right.
my
And
thought
so I
is,
hope people around him that he cares about calls them out.
I'm, during the session again, they brought up, I think it was Amy who mentioned in the notes, uh, booth babes, um, you know, and I'm gonna, there's booth babes and there are booth guys, right? These are tremendously fit, beautiful people. Does that bother anybody at conventions? And I've seen this at um, uh, direct response marketing conventions. I've seen it at financial conventions. What does a well or a not well clad woman have to do with selling financial services? It doesn't jive in my head. Um, or a guy. It doesn't. It's the same thing.
Well, if I could jump in,
Sure.
I've had this conversation with my brother who was in he spent his career in the machine tool and die industry. So that's not a very female centric industry.
Right.
And when I was sharing with him about my experiences at Expo West, where it's a room full of a lot of beautiful people and a lot of successful and empowered people, and he was contrasting that with the trade shows he went to, where he said, well, in his opinion, every woman who was there was paid to be there to demonstrate to the men, if you will, which is kind of a mournful position. So certainly there's, there are some people at Expo West who are paid to be presenters of product. But on the other hand, I do think that we're having this conversation, let's remember, within an industry where women are a very powerful presence and are becoming a more powerful presence all the time. And I talk to, female CEOs all the time. And in the years at the newspaper business and the business department, I can probably count on two hands maybe the time we had interviewed a female CEO, because there just weren't that many to talk to at that time. So I think that, that's not to say, once again, that we've gotten to where we need to be by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think that um, a lot of these categories that we deal with, like say sports nutrition, personal care, um, weight management. I mean, a lot of them, of course, if you want to sell the products, you got to sort of look the part, right? Nobody's going to buy a sports nutrition product from a guy who looks like a flabby couch potato.
Or
And
like me. Yeah, got it.
me, I mean, so, but the appearance part aside, I mean, I do think it's a statement about, this industry is connected with people who are interested in their health. there are a lot of empowered women in the industry, and I think that's great. And so there's an opportunity. I mean, I'm sorry to hear, Katrina, that you feel like you have these problems on a continual basis. That's a reminder that there's a long way to go. But I also think that it's an industry that has an opportunity to make these kind of changes because of this kind of representation within the industry. At least I'd like to think so, from my point of view.
With the word dismissive, which we've used several times, what can we do as an industry to mitigate those dismissive, hurtful words and comments?
I can think of immediate examples just from, the last couple of weeks. I think that, and I think this is universal. We're really talking about allyship, right? And making sure that you're bringing people with you when there are opportunities. So, for example, if I've been in situations where I'm very often I may be the only woman in a group, and I may happen onto a group of men, and I might know a couple of them, but they've known each other for 30 years. And I've been in the industry, a couple of years, and I may not know everyone in that circle, but there are times where I'm not being introduced. I might be standing there for 5 minutes, and then I introduce myself. I don't have a problem doing that, but that's me advocating for myself, and not everyone is comfortable doing that. And so I think that is really low hanging fruit. We're really talking about men being allies to women, in that way, and bringing them forward. And so, I think even just that as a small difference, anyone that's watching can make an impact today with that one behavioral change.
Let's wrap up, and in about a minute, and start with Craig. What can we do to challenge the industry to clean up its act?
Well, I don't know if that can be addressed in a minute, but I'll certainly try. The first thing, going back to Katrina's, most recent point, is we should be intentional in what we're doing. We should be bringing women into the fold if we're talking about, combating sexism. We need to see, and we see lots of women in the communications field, whether it's in public relations or, journalism, but we must continue to be intentional. We must continue to make sure that we are being allies for them. And because I'm a husband to a great wife, and I have two young daughters, and one of which will be graduating life for
We're
her.
losing Craig.
So she's for her sister, but I also want to make sure I need allies in the industry to, bring her along.
Katrina,
This is a big topic. There's so much to do. I think it's important that we're having this conversation out in the open, but more importantly, we need to be having this conversation where there's leadership in the room, because that is where change can happen, right? If the leaders are not on board because it's not impacting them, they can choose not to see it. So that's a great place to start. That's great that we're having this conversation, right? And people are watching. But I hope that everyone watching this, and everyone that watched the panel, and everyone on the panel can take this conversation back in the rooms that they're in, behind closed doors, where there's leaders there, and we keep having this conversation. So that's the one thing I would urge. I think that's where the hard work is actually behind closed doors.
and Hank, how about you?
Well, I think the one thing I would take away is to continue to focus on what I can do within my realm, which is to try to drive these concepts as being newsworthy, and to continue to cover those stories, to try to continue to bring new female voices in as sources in the stories. And I think we've done that pretty effectively, and we're going to continue to focus on it here at Natural Products Insider.
Listen, I
Hank,
thank
if you ever need some sources, you need some more female CEOs, you come ask me. I know a ton of them.
You're on the list.
Okay. At the top of the list, right, Hank?
Right.
Okay, good. Listen, thank you all. Katrina, Hank and Craig, thank you for participating in our After the Elephant series. We'll be back next week with another one. And thank you for joining us on After the Elephant. This has been a special edition of Late Night Health and our response and discussion panel to session one of Identifying the Elephant in the Room, Critical Communication Strategies in the Face of Sexism. Please join us next Thursday at 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time as we examine the topic of sexism in the healthcare, nutrition, and science sector of the natural products industry. And make sure you're registered for Elephant in the Room session so you can listen to what we're responding to during After the Elephant. Go to inisivox.thefairs.com. It's right there on the screen if you're not registered yet. And if you missed any of the session today or any of the other ones, you can watch them on replay at your convenience. And of course, we'll see you back here on social media for our post response and discussion on After the Elephant here on Late Night Health. I'm Mark Alyn. Thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye, elephants. We'll see you next time. Bye bye for now. Hold on, everybody.